On my first day, my manager looked me in the eye and whispered like he was doing me a favor. "You are just a new hire, so stay quiet." I nodded and opened exactly one ticket in the internal system that automatically routed to the audit committee. 3 days later, the company panicked over a process error, and the first person locked out was him. He thought he was teaching me unwritten rules. In reality, he just taught me the law. My name is Hallie James. I am 36 years old, and I have spent the last decade in the unglamorous, fluorescent-lit trenches of corporate compliance. People like me are the immune system of a company. We are the white blood cells that swarm around bad decisions and regulatory fines. But when I walked into the lobby of Iron Veil Systems in Cleveland on a gray Tuesday morning, I did not feel like an immune system. I felt like a fresh organ transplant that the body was already trying to reject. Iron Veil was a fintech darling, the kind of company that bragged about its hybrid model and its endless supply of cold brew coffee, while its stock price jittered like a caffeine addict. The orientation session was held in a conference room that was refrigerated to a temperature I estimated to be roughly 65 degrees. I sat there in my sensible blazer, listening to a 20-something HR coordinator chirp about our core values. The slide on the screen was massive. It featured a stock photo of a diverse group of people laughing at a laptop, overlaid with the words, "Integrity First" in bold, sans serif font. The next slide screamed, "Speak Up." It promised that Iron Veil was a safe harbor for truth, a place where ethical concerns were treated as gifts. I looked around the room. The other new hires were shivering, their arms crossed tight against their chests. The room was cold enough to preserve meat. It was the perfect metaphor. The ethics here were strictly ornamental, designed to look good on a website but kept in a deep freeze where they could not actually touch the daily operations. I was hired into the risk and compliance department. On paper, my job was to ensure that Iron Veil played by the rules. In reality, as I would soon discover, my job was to make sure the rule-breaking looked like it followed procedure. My manager was Grant Huxley. Grant was a man who seemed to have been manufactured in a factory that specialized in mid-level corporate ambition. He had a firm handshake, a smile that showed exactly 12 teeth, and eyes that scanned you like a barcode reader assessing your value. He met me after the orientation, leaning against the doorframe of his office. "Hallie," he said, extending a hand. "Welcome to the family. We are very big on the family concept here. We protect our own." I smiled the smile I had perfected growing up in the Midwest. It was polite, non-threatening, and completely opaque. "Thank you, Grant. I am excited to dive in." He ushered me into his office, which smelled faintly of expensive cologne and anxiety. He sat behind his desk and gestured for me to take the chair opposite him. The pleasantries evaporated the moment his door clicked shut. His posture shifted, the welcoming manager vanished, replaced by a man who looked like he was calculating the cost of my salary against his quarterly bonus. "Listen," Grant said, his voice dropping to a register that did not carry through the drywall. "I know you have experience. I saw your resume, but Iron Veil is different. We move fast. We break things, then we fix them later. Do not be the person who slows us down." I nodded, keeping my face neutral. "I understand. Agility is key." He leaned forward, his eyes locking onto mine. "Exactly. You are a new hire. You are here to learn the ropes, not to tangle them. So, here is my advice. Stay quiet. Observe. If you see something you do not understand, assume there is a reason for it. Here, if you want to survive, you do not ask too many questions. You just execute." It was a warning wrapped in mentorship. I had heard variations of this speech before, but never so blatant, and never on the first day. Usually, it took a manager at least 3 months to tell you to shut up. Grant was efficient. I walked out of his office with a smile plastered on my face, but my internal radar was already screaming. I went to my assigned desk, which was situated in a high-traffic area near the break room. It was a terrible spot for concentration, but an excellent spot for surveillance. That was when I smelled it. The rot. It came in the form of a contractor badge. I saw a man walk past my desk, heading straight for the secure server room. He was wearing a lanyard with the logo of a company called Northbridge Enablement. He swiped his badge. The light turned green, and he walked in. He did not sign a log. He was not escorted by an Iron Veil employee. He just walked into the heart of our data infrastructure as if he owned the building. I frowned. I had spent the last week reviewing the vendor master list as part of my pre-boarding preparation. I have a photographic memory for spreadsheets, a talent that makes me boring at parties but dangerous in an audit. I remembered Northbridge Enablement. They were categorized as a training partner, They did soft skills workshops and leadership coaching. Why did a leadership coach have unescorted access to the server room? I pulled up the vendor due diligence folder on the shared drive. I wanted to see their background check, their security clearance, their scope of work. I searched for Northbridge. The folder was empty. There was no risk assessment. There was no data privacy addendum. There was absolutely nothing that legally allowed a third-party trainer to be within 50 feet of our customer data, let alone inside the room where it lived. I was still staring at the empty folder when an email from Grant popped up. Subject: Quick favor, policy review. Hallie, since you are ramping up, I want you to review these pending policy exceptions. It is mostly administrative cleanup. Just check the boxes and clear the queue so we can start the quarter fresh. Nothing heavy. Thanks. I opened the attachment. It was a list of 42 exception requests. In the compliance world, an exception is permission to break a rule for a specific business reason. Usually, these are rare and temporary. This list was a graveyard of security protocols. There were requests to bypass multi-factor authentication for certain executive accounts. There were requests to extend vendor contract terms without legal review. And there, buried in the middle of the spreadsheet, were 6 separate exceptions, granting Northbridge enablement undefined administrative privileges. The justification column was filled with vague buzzwords like accelerated deployment and operational synergy. Grant wanted me to rubber stamp them. He wanted the new girl, whose login credentials were less than 4 hours old, to put her name on the approval line. If anything went wrong later, he could point to the system and say that Hallie James approved it. He could claim I was incompetent, that I did not understand what I was doing, and he would be clean. I sat back in my chair. The air conditioning was humming, a low drone that masked the sound of typing around me. Grant thought he was smart. He thought he had found a perfect patsy. He looked at me and saw a 36-year-old woman from the Midwest who would be grateful for the job and too timid to rock the boat. He thought my silence in his office was submission. He was wrong. My silence was data collection. I did not approve the exceptions. Instead, I opened a new tab. I navigated to the company's governance, risk, and compliance portal. This was the holy book of the company, the codified laws that everyone ignored until they were being deposed. I typed in a search query. I was looking for something specific. Every company has a policy about what to do when a manager asks you to break the rules. It is a standard clause required by federal regulators. I found it. Policy 9.4. I read the text on the screen. Pressure to conceal a control failure. The definition was crisp and beautiful. It stated that any instruction from management to ignore, bypass, or falsely approve a control gap was in itself a Tier 1 compliance violation. It went on to say that such violations were reportable immediately to the audit committee, bypassing local management entirely. I looked across the open plan office. Through the glass wall of his office, I could see Grant laughing on the phone. He looked comfortable. He looked like a man who owned the room. He had told me to stay quiet. He had told me not to ask questions. I looked back at my screen. I was not going to ask a single question. I was going to follow the policy exactly as it was written. If you tell me to be quiet, that tells me everything I need to know. It tells me you are terrified of what the paperwork will say. I took a sip of my water. It was lukewarm. I placed my hands on the keyboard. Grant wanted me to learn the culture. He wanted me to understand how things really worked at Ironvale. I decided I would show him that I was a very fast learner. I was going to follow his instructions to the letter, just not the instructions he thought he had given me. I clicked on the button that said, Report a Violation. The form loaded. It asked for the nature of the incident. I typed in the policy number, Policy 9.4. Under the description, I did not write an emotional rant. I did not use exclamation points. I simply wrote down the time of our meeting, the exact quote, stay quiet, and the request to approve unvetted security exceptions for Northbridge enablement. I did not hit submit yet. That would be amateur. I saved it as a draft. In this system, a draft was timestamped. It proved that I had documented the concern immediately. It was my insurance policy. Grant Huxley thought he was hazing the new hire. He had no idea he had just handed me the ammunition to end his career. He wanted silence. I would give him silence, the kind of silence that falls right before the executioner pulls the lever. I minimized the window and opened the spreadsheet he had sent me. I started highlighting the rows, color-coding them by risk level. I would play his game for exactly as long as it took to gather the rest of the evidence. My first day was not even over, and I already had a target. Welcome to the family. Indeed. The chaotic energy at Ironvale was officially labeled as restructuring, but to anyone with eyes, It looked more like a controlled demolition of common sense. The chief financial officer had recently returned from a tech summit in San Francisco with a new obsession for automation. His latest directive was an artificial intelligence tool designed to streamline operational costs. The headline feature was that any expense under $8,000 was now auto-approved by the algorithm to reduce administrative friction. The executives called it efficiency. The accountants in the break room called it a nightmare. I overheard one of the senior bookkeepers whispering into her phone near the coffee machine, looking like she was on the verge of tears. She was explaining to someone that the marketing team had just expensed a petting zoo for a Tuesday morale event, and the AI had categorized it as office supplies because they bought pens for the waivers. This environment of loose money and fast approvals was the perfect ecosystem for a man like Grant Huxley. I spent my second week observing Grant operate. He did not act like a mid-level compliance manager. He walked the floor with the swagger of a fixer, the guy you called when you needed red tape cut with a machete. In our morning stand-up meetings, which were held standing up not for brevity, but because there were not enough chairs. Grant loved to talk about his wins. "We are not here to be the no police," Grant said, pacing back and forth in his Italian loafers. "We are enablers. Look at Northbridge. I pulled strings to get them onboarded in record time because the sales team needed that training yesterday. That is value add. That is what leadership looks like." He stopped pacing and looked directly at me. "Hallie, you are doing a great job getting settled. Just remember, do not overthink the paperwork. Do not make the process difficult. We are building a plane while flying it." I nodded, keeping my expression pleasantly vacuous. "Understood. Grant, speed is the priority." Grant smiled, satisfied that his programming of the new hire was taking hold. He did not know that every time he said the word speed, I heard the word negligence. I needed to understand the landscape of the battlefield, so I started mapping out the personnel. In any toxic office, there are 3 types of people: the predators, the prey, and the scavengers. Mara King was the human resources business partner assigned to our division. Theoretically, HR is supposed to be a neutral party, a check on management power. But Mara was rarely seen without Grant. They went to lunch together every day at noon sharp. I watched them from my desk. They stood too close to each other near the elevator. Their laughter was a little too synchronized. Mara was not a check on Grant. She was his perimeter defense. If I went to HR with a complaint, it would be on Grant's desk before I returned to my chair. Then there was Owen Price. Owen worked in internal audit, a department that was technically separate from us but shared the same floor. Owen was the opposite of Grant. He was a man who seemed to be trying to fade into the beige wallpaper. He spoke in a monotone and wore shirts that were always slightly wrinkled, but I noticed his eyes. When Grant was holding court in the middle of the office, boasting about his vendor relationships, Owen would look up from his monitor. His gaze was flat, clinical, and unblinking. It was the look of a machine scanning for defects. I made a mental note that Owen Price was not a friend, but he might be a weapon I could use later. I also learned the most important unwritten rule of Iron Veil curiosity was a fireable offense. There was a junior analyst named Justin who sat 2 rows over from me. Justin was 24, eager, and unfortunately for him, diligent. On Wednesday, I heard him ask a question during a vendor management call. He simply asked why a certain software supplier did not have a tax ID number on file. The room went silent. Grant cut him off with a joke about Justin being a stickler for details. By Friday, Justin was gone. He had not been fired. That would have been too messy. Instead, he had been laterally transferred to the documentation team in the basement archives, a role that involved scanning paper contracts from 1998. The official reason was that Justin was not a culture fit for the fast-paced risk team. The message was received loud and clear by everyone else. If you ask about the vendors, you disappear. I kept my head down. I did my work. I played the part of the obedient employee who was just happy to be there, but I was watching everything. The first crack in the dam appeared on a Tuesday afternoon. It came, as most corporate disasters do, from a careless email reply. An executive assistant had sent out a calendar invite for the upcoming leadership retreat. It was supposed to go to the director level and above, but she had accidentally included the entire risk distribution list. She recalled the message within 30 seconds. But 30 seconds is an eternity for someone who knows how to take a screenshot. I opened the image I had captured. The retreat was scheduled for 3 days in Nashville at a 5-star resort. The agenda included whiskey tasting, a private concert, and a golf tournament. At the bottom of the invite, in elegant gold font, it read, Proudly sponsored by our platinum training partner, Northbridge Enablement. I felt a cold thrill in my stomach. Vendor kickbacks are rarely this obvious. Usually, they are hidden in shell companies or consulting fees. But Grant and his friends were so arrogant, so drunk on their own immunity, that they were putting the bribe on the invitation. Northbridge was not just a vendor. They were the bankroll for the executive's vacation. I needed to see how deep this went. I turned my chair slightly so I could see Grant's office. He was sitting at his desk, his phone tucked between his ear and his shoulder. On his dual monitors, I could see the dashboard for the approval queue. This was the same queue of exceptions I had refused to sign. Grant was not reading. He was clicking. It was a rhythmic, mechanical motion. Click to select. Click to approve. Click to confirm. He was clearing the board. He was authorizing access to sensitive customer data, bypassing firewall rules, and granting administrative privileges to Northbridge personnel, all while talking about his weekend plans on the phone. He approved 15 high-risk exceptions in less than 1 minute. He was not managing risk. He was legalizing a breach. I turned back to my own screen. My heart was hammering against my ribs, but my hands were steady. I needed to know where the money was going. The Nashville trip was the perk, but there had to be cash. You do not compromise an entire compliance framework just for a golf trip. I navigated to the shared drive. Ironvale's file structure was a mess of legacy folders and poorly migrated cloud data. Grant had given me access to the department admin folder so I could organize the policy library. I started digging. I looked for anything related to Northbridge. Most of the folders were empty or contained generic marketing fluff. I was about to give up when I saw a subfolder labeled Archive 2024. It was the kind of digital attic where people threw files they did not want to look at but were afraid to delete. Inside, there was a folder named Incentives. I clicked it. Access denied. I tried the next folder, labeled Partner Metrics. Inside was a single Excel file with an innocuous name, Enablement Rebate Summary. I held my breath and double-clicked. The file opened. It was not a rebate summary for the company. It was a ledger. The spreadsheet tracked monthly payments from Northbridge Enablement back to a set of initials. There was a column for contract value and a column for referral fee. The referral fee was fixed at 10%. I scrolled down. The rows were dated back 18 months. Jan, $12,000. Paid to G, H. Feb, $14,500. Paid to G, H. March, $8,000. Paid to G, H, G. Grant Huxley. I calculated the total in my head. It was over $150,000 in a year and a half. This was not just a policy violation. This was embezzlement. Grant was receiving a 10% cut of every dollar Ironvale paid to Northbridge, and in exchange, he was giving them the keys to the kingdom. I looked up. Grant was walking out of his office, putting on his jacket. He stopped by my desk, flashing that 12-tooth smile. "Heading out for an early lunch with Mara," he said cheerfully. "Don't work too hard. Hallie, remember, we are a family here." I smiled back. "Enjoy lunch, Grant. I will just be here organizing the files." "Good girl," he said, and walked away. I waited until he was on the elevator. Then I saved the file to my local drive. I did not print it. Printers have logs. I did not email it to myself. Emails have filters. I simply moved a copy into a hidden folder on my desktop named System Cache Temp, a place no IT scan would look unless they were searching for a virus. Grant thought he was untouchable because he controlled the department. He thought he was safe because he had HR in his pocket and an auditor who looked at the floor. He thought the new hire was a quiet, obedient woman who would be grateful for the paycheck. He was right about one thing. I was grateful. I was very grateful that he had been too lazy to check the permission settings on the archive folder. I closed the spreadsheet. The screen went back to the dull gray of my desktop background. I looked at the reflection of the office in my monitor. It looked the same as it had 10 minutes ago. The lights were still buzzing. The air was still freezing. The coffee machine was still gurgling. But everything had changed. I was no longer just an employee. I was a witness building a case, and Grant Huxley had just given me the murder weapon. I did not need to hack into the mainframe. I did not need to write a single line of code or guess a password. In the corporate world, the most dangerous weapon is not a virus. It is the audit trail. Every click, every approval, and every view is recorded in a database that nobody looks at until it is too late. I was about to become the person who looked. I started my morning with a cup of black coffee and the identity access management logs. The office was humming with the low-energy buzz of a Wednesday. People were discussing their weekend plans or complaining about the weather in Cleveland. I tuned them out. On my screen, I was reconstructing the digital movements of Grant Huxley. I filtered the logs by user ID and set the time frame for the last 90 days. The screen filled with data. It was a waterfall of timestamps and IP addresses. I traced the approval patterns. It was exactly as I suspected. Grant was not just approving exceptions, he was approving them in batches at odd hours. I saw a cluster of approvals stamped at 11:45 at night on a Saturday. Another batch was approved at 5 in the morning on a Tuesday. The geolocation tag for the Saturday login was not his home in the suburbs. It was an IP address registered to a luxury hotel in downtown Nashville. He had been approving security bypasses while he was physically with the vendor he was supposed to be regulating. I took a screenshot. I saved it to my encrypted local folder. Next, I moved to the vendor master list. This is the source of truth for every company Iron Veil does business with. I pulled up the profile for Northbridge Enablement. The entry was sparse. Under service category, it was listed as Training and Enablement. Under risk rating, it was listed as low. Then I clicked on the tab labeled System Privileges. My breath hitched in my throat. A training vendor should have access to a conference room and maybe a projector. At most, they might have a guest login for the presentation software. Northbridge Enablement had read and export access to the production customer database. I stared at the screen. Export. That meant they could not just look at our client list. They could download it. They could pull social security numbers, credit scores, and loan histories. Giving a leadership coach the ability to download the financial data of 2 million customers was not just negligence, it was insanity. It was the kind of security hole that destroys companies and sends executives to congressional hearings. I checked the approval history for this specific privilege assignment. It had been granted 6 months ago. The approver was Grant Huxley. The justification field contained 2 words, operational efficiency. I needed to lock this down, but I could not just report it yet. I needed Grant to hang himself. I needed him to explicitly tell me to ignore the fire that was burning in the server room. I opened my email client. I composed a message. I kept it polite, naive, and incredibly dangerous. Subject: missing documentation for Northbridge. Hi Grant. I am going through the vendor files as you asked. I noticed that Northbridge has export access to the customer database, but I cannot find the data privacy impact assessment or the risk assessment that usually accompanies that level of access. Is it stored in a different folder? I want to make sure we are audit ready before the end of the quarter. Thanks. Hallie. I hit send. I watched the clock on my computer tray. It was 10:14 in the morning. Grant was in his office. I could see the back of his head. He was scrolling through something on his phone. At 10:14 and 30 seconds, a notification pinged on my screen. New message from Grant Huxley. I opened it. He had not even taken the time to format a greeting. No need. We have a legacy waiver for them because they are a strategic partner. Do not waste time digging up old paperwork. Don't make a big deal out of this. Just focus on the policy cleanup I gave you. Let me handle the vendor side. I read the email 3 times. Don't make a big deal out of this. Let me handle it. He had just given me a gift wrapped in arrogance. He had put it in writing. He had instructed a subordinate to stop looking for missing compliance documentation regarding a high-risk vendor. I minimized the email and opened a new browser window. I navigated to the governance, risk, and compliance portal. I went to the policy library and typed in the numbers. Policy 9.4. I read the text again, savoring every word. Any attempt by management to direct staff to ignore, conceal, or fail to report a known control gap is considered a Tier 1 violation. The definition of a control gap included unauthorized or unvetted access to sensitive data. Grant had authorized the access. The vetting was missing, and when I pointed it out, he directed me to ignore it. He had hit every single criterion for a reportable offense. I clicked Create New Incident. The form was long and intimidating. It warned that false reporting was a serious offense. It asked for dates, names, and evidence. I filled it out methodically. Incident Type Management Override of Controls. Subject: Grant Huxley. Date of occurrence: today. Description: Manager instructed employee to halt inquiry into missing risk assessments for a vendor with sensitive data export privileges. I attached the screenshot of the vendor master list showing the export rights. I attached a PDF copy of his email telling me not to make a big deal out of it. I hovered my mouse over the submit button. If I pressed it now, the alarms would go off. The general counsel would be notified. The audit committee would get an automated alert. It would be war. And I was not ready to fire the first shot yet. I needed more. I needed to be absolutely certain that when I struck, he could not wiggle out of it. I clicked Save as Draft. The system refreshed. A small banner appeared at the top of the screen, draft violation number 4029 created by user H. James at 10:21 a.m. That was the trap. The timestamp was immutable. In a digital investigation, the creation of a draft proves intent. It proves that I saw the issue and documented it at the moment it happened. If Grant later claimed that I never told him, or that I was making things up in retaliation for a bad performance review, I could point to this draft. It proved that I had identified the crime before he tried to punish me. I sat back in my chair, feeling a cold calm settle over me. I was no longer just the new hire. I was a sleeper agent inside his department. I decided to look at one last thing. I was curious about Policy 9.4. It was a strangely specific policy, written with aggressive clarity. Most corporate policies are vague, full of legal gray areas. This one was a razor blade. I clicked on the version history tab of the policy document. I wanted to see who had written it. The log showed that the policy had been last updated 3 years ago. I looked at the column labeled Author, Grant Huxley. I almost laughed out loud in the quiet office. Grant had written the policy. He was the one who defined the violation. He was the one who set the trap that he had just walked into. He knew exactly what the consequences were because he had designed them. He had probably written it to use against someone else, a weapon to purge his rivals during his climb to the middle. He thought the rules he wrote were for other people. He thought he was the exemption. I looked through the glass wall at him. He was standing up now, buttoning his suit jacket, getting ready to go to lunch with Mara. He looked confident. He looked untouchable. I turned back to my screen and closed the draft. The system had locked it away in the database. It was waiting there, a loaded gun sitting in a drawer, ready for me to open it when the time was right. "Hey, Hallie," Grant called out as he walked past my desk. "I am heading out. Keep up the good work on those files. And remember what I said." "I will," I said, my voice steady. "I will remember everything." He nodded and walked toward the elevator. I watched him go. He had no idea that the system he used to control everyone else had just started a file on him. He had told me to stay quiet, and I was going to be very quiet. I was going to be as silent as a hard drive recording a crime. The retaliation began exactly 24 hours after I sent the email. It was not explosive. It was not a shouting match in the hallway. In the corporate world, violence is silent. It is the click of a mouse that revokes a permission, the meeting invite that disappears from your calendar, and the sudden, suffocating isolation that descends like a heavy fog. I arrived at my desk at 8:45 in the morning. I unlocked my computer and navigated to the shared drive to continue my review of the vendor files. I double-clicked the folder labeled Vendor Contracts. A small gray box popped up on my screen. Access denied. Contact your system administrator. I stared at the message. Yesterday, I had full read and write access. Today, I was locked out. I tried the archive folder where I had found the rebate ledger. Access denied. I tried the general team folder. Access denied. My stomach tightened. This was the first move. They were blinding me. If I could not see the files, I could not gather more evidence. Grant had not replied to my email about the missing risk assessments. Instead, he had quietly cut my digital throat. At 9:30, my desk phone rang. It was Mara King from Human Resources. "Hallie?" Her voice was bright, airy, and completely terrifying. "Do you have a quick sec? I would love to grab a coffee with you. Just a little check-in to see how you are settling in." I looked toward Grant's office. He was not there. "Sure, Mara. I will meet you in the break room." I walked to the break room. Mara was already there, leaning against the counter, holding 2 paper cups. She was wearing a pastel suit that looked disarmingly soft. She handed me a cup. "So," she said, her smile not quite reaching her eyes, "how is the first week going?" "We want to make sure you feel supported." "It has been informative," I said, taking a sip. The coffee was burnt. "That is great," Mara said. She took a step closer, invading my personal space just enough to be uncomfortable. "You know, Hallie, Iron Vale has a very specific culture. We are high performance, but we are also low drama. I have heard a little feedback that you might be focusing on the wrong things, digging into old history, asking a lot of technical questions. It is making some people feel anxious." She paused, letting the word hang in the cold air. "I just want to do my job thoroughly," I said. Mara tilted her head. "Of course. But there is a difference between thoroughness and disruption. We need team players. Hallie, don't be the person who creates stress. If you keep looking for problems, people might start thinking you are the problem. We want you to succeed here. Just flow with the current." Okay. It was a beautifully wrapped threat. She was telling me that my job was in danger if I did not stop asking about Northbridge. I went back to my desk. Grant was there now. He did not say hello. He sent me a calendar invite for a meeting titled Performance Alignment. It was scheduled for 10 minutes from now. I walked into his office. He did not gesture for me to sit. He handed me a stack of papers. I feel like you are struggling to understand our priorities, Grant said, his voice flat. So I am going to simplify things for you. I need you to manually reconcile these expense reports from 3 years ago. They are hard copies. I need them digitized and categorized by tax code. I need it done by the end of the day. I looked at the stack. It was at least 4 inches thick. It was busy work. It was punishment. It was a task designed to be impossible so that when I inevitably failed to finish it, he could document my incompetence. This looks like a multi-day project, Grant, I said. It is a priority project, he countered, staring at his monitor. If you cannot handle the pace, we might need to have a serious conversation about your future here. Get it done. I walked out of his office with the stack of papers. I could feel the eyes of the other analysts on me. They knew. They had seen this happen to Justin. I was the new pariah. I sat down at my desk and placed the papers to the side. I made a show of looking panicked. I opened Excel and started typing frantically. I wanted Grant to see me sweating. I wanted him to think his pressure campaign was working, but on my second screen, hidden behind the spreadsheet, I opened my email. I was not going to suffer in silence. I was going to paper the file. I drafted an email to Grant. Subject clarification on priority assignment. Hi, Grant. Per our conversation in your office at 10:15 this morning, I am proceeding with the manual digitization of the 3-year-old expense reports you assigned. You stated this must be completed by 5 p.m. today. I want to confirm that this administrative task takes priority over the mandatory regulatory policy review I was previously assigned. Given the strict deadline you have set, best, Hallie. I hit send. I was creating a timeline. If he fired me for performance, I would have a record showing he pulled me off compliance work to do janitorial data entry the day after I reported a violation. 20 minutes later, a small instant message window popped up in the bottom corner of my screen. It was from Owen Price in Internal Audit. Owen Price. Do not reply to this message. Do not open it on full screen. My heart hammered. I kept typing numbers into my spreadsheet, glancing down at the chat. Owen Price. I saw your access get revoked. I know what you are doing. If you see something wrong, do not talk to Mara. HR is not a safe harbor. They route everything back to the business unit leader. If you file a complaint with them, Grant will see it before the ink is dry. I waited. Another message appeared. Owen Price. Here's the link to the external whistleblower portal. It is hosted by a third-party law firm. It is the only channel they cannot scrub. But be careful. The internal hotline claims to be anonymous, but the IP logs are viewable by IT. It reports to the CFO. The CFO signed the Northbridge contract. He sent a hyperlink. Then he went offline. I did not click the link. Not yet. Ironvale monitored web traffic. If I click that link from my work machine, I might as well send up a flare. I copied the URL and wrote it down on a sticky note, which I then buried inside my purse. The afternoon dragged on. I worked on the stupid expense reports, my fingers cramping. Grant walked by my desk at 4 o'clock. He stopped and leaned against the partition. He looked relaxed, almost happy. You look stressed, Hallie, he said. Just trying to meet the deadline, I said, not looking up. You know, he said, lowering his voice to a conspiratorial whisper. We had a guy last year, smart kid, but he had a hard time letting things go. He thought he knew better than the executives. He kept filing tickets about minor process errors. It became exhausting for everyone. He took a sip of his sparkling water. What happened to him? I asked, playing along. We had to restructure his role, Grant said. He was gone in 2 weeks. It is a tough market out there. Hallie, reputation travels fast. Nobody wins when you fight the house. The house always has more lawyers than you do. He patted my desk. Just finish the papers. We will start fresh tomorrow. He walked away. It was not just a story. It was a forecast. I stayed until 6:30 to finish the scanning. The office emptied out. The cleaning crew started vacuuming the carpets. I was exhausted, but my mind was racing. Before I logged off, I decided to check one last thing. I opened the security log for my own user profile. Since I was in risk, I technically had the rights to view my own session history to audit my productivity. I scrolled through the list of logins. 8:45 a.m. Hallie James, Workstation 4. 12:30 p.m. Hallie James, Workstation 4. Then I saw it. Yesterday. 7:15 p.m. Hallie James, remote login. I froze. I had been at home at 7:15 last night. I had been making dinner. My laptop was in my bag. Turned off. I had not logged in. I expanded the details. The login had originated from within the building. The terminal ID was listed as XX-CON-FAA. That was the main executive conference room on the top floor. Someone had used my credentials to log into the network after I had left. They had been inside my account for 12 minutes. What had they done? Had they planted files? Had they deleted emails? Or were they just checking to see what I had saved? I felt a wave of nausea. They were not just blocking me. They were framing me. If they planted confidential documents on my drive and then discovered them, they could fire me for cause. They could say I was stealing data. My phone buzzed on the desk. It was a text message. I looked at the screen. The number was unsaved. But I recognized the area code. Hey, Hallie. It's Grant. Are you free tonight around 8? I am grabbing a drink at the Staggering Ox. I think you and I got off on the wrong foot. I want to guide you on how to really survive here. Off the record. Come by. I stared at the phone. The Staggering Ox was a dim, noisy bar 2 blocks from the office. He wanted me there, alone, off the record. He was going to offer me a deal, or he was going to threaten me in a place where no one could hear. Or, worse, he was setting me up to look like I was having an inappropriate relationship with my manager to discredit anything I said later. I want to guide you on how to survive. It was the bait. He thought I was broken. He thought the busy work and the isolation had softened me up, and now he was going to reel me in. I picked up the phone. I did not reply. I knew exactly what I was going to do. I was not going to the bar. I was going home to prepare the kill shot. The trap was set, but he was the one standing on the trigger. I did not wear a black balaclava. I did not rappel down an elevator shaft with a laser cutter. In the modern corporate world, you do not need explosives to bring down a fortified structure. You just need to know which lever activates the fire suppression system and then have the patience to pull it when nobody is watching. The heist I was planning was a procedural one. It was a compliance heist. I spent Friday morning in a state of aggressive obedience. I digitized the rest of the expense reports Grant had dumped on my desk. I smiled at Mara when she walked past, offering a polite nod that suggested I had been thoroughly cowed by her threat. I was the model of a beaten-down new hire who had learned her place, but on my screen, concealed behind a wall of spreadsheet windows, I was assembling the kill kit. A successful audit investigation is not about what you know, it is about what you can prove. Rumors are useless. Feelings are irrelevant. The only thing that matters is the document. I had 4 specific pieces of ammunition, and I arranged them in a folder labeled Personal Drafts. Exhibit A was the email from Grant. Do not make a big deal out of this. It was the smoking gun. It proved he was aware of the risk and had explicitly ordered me to ignore it. Exhibit B was the access log. I had exported the raw data showing Northbridge enablement downloading customer files. I highlighted the timestamps that corresponded to non-business hours. Exhibit C was the rebate summary I had pulled from the archive. This was the most dangerous piece of evidence because Grant could claim I had forged it. To counter that, I ran the file through a checksum utility. It generated a unique cryptographic hash, a digital fingerprint that proved the file had not been altered since the moment I copied it from the server. I took a screenshot of the file metadata, showing the creation date and the author Grant Huxley. Exhibit D was a timeline. I had constructed a 72-hour chronology of events, linking his approval of the exceptions to the exact time the vendor accessed the database. It showed cause and effect. He opened the door, and they walked in to loot the place. I checked the time. It was 3:30 in the afternoon. The office was beginning to slide into that loose, frantic energy of a Friday. People were closing their laptops. Discussions were shifting from deliverables to happy hour plans. Grant had left at noon, claiming he had a client meeting, but his calendar was blocked out for travel time to the airport. He was likely already on his way to Nashville for the retreat that Northbridge was paying for. He was off to drink whiskey on the vendor's dime. I was here to make sure he choked on it. I opened the governance, risk, and compliance portal. Iron Veil had spent millions of dollars on this system. They touted it as a state-of-the-art shield against corruption. Grant treated it like a nuisance, a box-ticking exercise that got in the way of real business. He did not understand that the system was not just a shield, it was a trap. I navigated to the incident reporting module. Most employees, if they ever report anything, choose the general misconduct category. That routes the ticket to human resources. If I did that, Mara would see it Monday morning, call Grant, and I would be fired for cultural incompatibility before lunch. I was not going to make that mistake. I selected a very specific category from the drop-down menu policy violation. Vendor data access misclassification. The screen refreshed, asking for details. I uploaded my 4 exhibits. I wrote a description that was devoid of emotion. I did not use adjectives. I used verbs and timestamps. Manager directed employee to bypass required risk assessment. Vendor subsequently accessed sensitive customer data. Manager received financial payments linked to vendor contract value. Then came the critical step. At the bottom of the form, there was a small checkbox labeled, "Does this incident involve management pressure to conceal?" I checked the box. I knew the routing rules for this system better than the people who bought it. When that specific box is checked, and the accused party is listed as a director or above, the system engages a hard-coded logic path. It locks the ticket. It prevents local HR from viewing or deleting it. And most importantly, it triggers an auto-control response. The response for a data security violation involving management pressure was automatic and immediate. Suspend the vendor credentials to prevent further data loss until an investigation can be conducted. I looked at the clock. It was 4:55 in the afternoon. The office was almost empty. The cleaning crew was starting to empty the trash bins at the far end of the row. The lights in the hallway had dimmed to energy-saving mode. I waited. If I submitted it now, there was a tiny chance someone in IT might see the alert and try to intervene as a favor to Grant. I needed to wait for the weekend dead zone. I needed the system to take over when the humans were gone. 6. I pictured Grant in the first-class lounge, ordering a drink. He probably felt invincible. He had silenced the new hire. He had his kickback secure. He was the king of his little kingdom. 4:57. I put on my coat. I slung my bag over my shoulder. I stood up, leaving my computer unlocked for one final second. 4:58. The golden minute. I reached out and clicked Submit. The screen blinked. A processing wheel spun for 2 seconds. Then a plain green text box appeared. Case ID 4029 created. Severity level critical. Auto actions scheduled. I did not wait to read the fine print. I locked my computer. The screen went black. I walked to the elevator. My heart beat a little faster, but my face was a mask of boredom. I nodded to the security guard at the front desk. "Have a good weekend," he said. "You too," I replied. I walked out of the revolving doors and into the cool Cleveland air. The wind hit my face, and I took a deep breath. It tasted like exhaust fumes and victory. I walked toward the parking garage. I was halfway to my car when my phone vibrated in my pocket. It was not a text message. It was an automated notification from the GRC system. Because I was the reporter of the incident, the system kept me updated on the status of the ticket. I pulled out my phone and looked at the screen. System alert. Automated containment protocol activated. Target Northbridge enablement. Action account freeze. API. Token revocation. Status. Pending execution. Effective Monday. 9:00 a.m. I stared at the words. The domino had fallen. Grant would not know. He would spend his weekend golfing and laughing, completely unaware that the ground beneath him had already dissolved. When he walked in on Monday morning, he would not be walking into a job. He would be walking into a crime scene, and the system had already strung up the police tape. I got into my car and started the engine. I turned on the radio. A pop song was playing, something loud and cheerful. I turned it up. "New hire, stay quiet," I whispered to the empty car. I had stayed quiet. I had stayed very quiet. And now, the silence was about to be broken by the sound of $100 million contract snapping in half. Monday morning at Iron Vale arrived with the deceptive calm of a receding tide before a tsunami. At 8:55, the office was a portrait of mundane corporate life. People were huddled in small groups, clutching their coffee mugs like life preservers, exchanging stories about their weekends. Someone was complaining about the traffic on I-480. Someone else was detailing their child's soccer tournament. It was the standard overture to another week of grinding productivity. Grant Huxley strode into the department with the energy of a man who had just spent 3 days being treated like royalty. He was wearing a fresh suit. His tan was slightly deeper, and he radiated the smug satisfaction of someone who believes he has everything under control. He walked past my desk, pausing just long enough to drop a condescending smile. "Good morning, Hallie," he said, his voice dripping with faux paternal warmth. "Good girl. Keep up the hard work." He patted the edge of my cubicle wall, as if he were petting a dog. Then continued toward his office. I watched him go. I did not smile back. I just looked at the digital clock on the bottom right of my screen. It was 8:59. I took a sip of water. I adjusted my headset. I waited. At 9 o'clock exactly, the invisible guillotine fell. It started with a murmur from the operations team across the aisle. A few heads popped up over the cubicle walls. Then the murmur grew into a buzz of confusion. "Hey, is the dashboard down for anyone else?" someone asked loud enough to be heard. "I am getting a 403 error," another voice replied. "Access forbidden." Then, a shout from the sales floor down the hall. "I cannot access the pipeline. The integration is dead." I sat perfectly still. On my screen, I had the system monitoring tool open in a small window. I watched as the status indicators for every Northbridge connected application flipped from green to a violent, blinking red. The integration token had been revoked. The API keys had been shredded by the system. Northbridge enablement was effectively digitally decapitated. Grant's door flew open. He marched out, phone pressed to his ear, his face a mask of annoyance that was rapidly curdling into panic. "What do you mean, system lockout?" He barked into the phone. "That is impossible. We have a valid contract. Fix it." He hung up and stormed over to the IT help desk kiosk, which was unfortunately located right next to the break room. I could hear him yelling at the poor support technician. "Who authorized this?" Grant demanded. "I am the director of risk. I did not authorize a shutdown. Who did this?" The technician, a young guy named Kevin who looked like he wanted to dissolve into the floor, stammered, "Sir, it says it is a systemic policy enforcement. It is automated. I cannot override it." Grant spun around, his eyes wild. He scanned the room, looking for a scapegoat. His gaze landed on me. He marched over to my desk. The good girl veneer was gone. In its place was the raw, ugly aggression of a man losing control. "What did you do?" he hissed, leaning over my desk. "Did you touch the vendor settings I told you to leave them alone?" I looked up at him, my expression one of carefully rehearsed confusion. "I did not touch the settings. Grant, I have been working on the expense reports you assigned me. Remember you locked me out of the vendor folder on Thursday?" His face twitched. He remembered. He had cut my access to silence me, and now that very act was my alibi. He could not accuse me of changing a setting I could not even see. "Then why is the system down?" he muttered, more to himself than to me. "This is going to cost us thousands by the hour." He ran back to his office. By 9:30, the chaos had metastasized. The sales team could not update their deals because the Northbridge enablement software was woven into the CRM login. The finance team started shouting that they couldn't run the morning reconciliation because the data feed was severed. Then came the email from Mara King. Subject urgent. System status update team. We are experiencing a minor incident regarding a third-party integration. The technical team is reviewing it. Please do not discuss this with external clients or post about it on Slack. We expect a resolution shortly. I almost laughed. Minor incident. Do not discuss. In corporate language, that is equivalent to admitting the building is on fire and the exits are locked. By telling people not to talk, she ensured that everyone was now whispering about it in the stairwells. The phone started ringing. Clients were calling. They were getting error messages when trying to access their training modules. The support lines were jamming up. Iron Veil was bleeding credibility, and the wound was self-inflicted. Grant was in his office, frantically typing. I could see him through the glass. He was trying to force an override. He was trying to invoke an emergency exception. I knew exactly what he was doing because I knew Policy 9.4. Under normal circumstances, a director can authorize an emergency bypass to keep operations running. But there is a specific clause for incidents triggered by a management pressure report. In that scenario, the emergency override button is disabled for the manager named in the complaint. The only people who can unlock the system are the chief audit executive or the general counsel. Grant clicked his mouse. He stared at the screen. He clicked again, harder. He slammed the mouse down on the desk. He could not fix it. He was locked out of his own disaster. He picked up his desk phone. He was probably calling it AE again to scream at them. Then, he stopped. I watched him freeze. His hand slowly lowered the receiver back to the cradle. He was staring at his email inbox. I knew what had just arrived. When a Policy 9.4 violation is filed against a senior leader, the system sends a formal notification to the accused. It is not a vague warning, it is a legal notice. I imagine the subject line, Notice of Investigation, Reportable Policy Violation Case, 4029. I watched the color drain from his face. It did not happen gradually. It happened all at once, like a light switch being flipped. He went from red-faced anger to a ghostly, sickly white. He read the email. I could see his eyes moving back and forth, scanning the lines. We received a reportable policy violation naming you. He slumped back in his chair, the arrogance that had carried him through the morning, through the weekend. Through his entire career at Ironvale, it evaporated. He looked up. He looked through the glass wall. He looked directly at me. I did not look away. I did not smile. I did not gloat. I simply sat there, my hands folded on my desk, watching him realize that the new hire he had told to stay quiet had just spoken louder than he ever could. He stood up, his movements jerky and uncoordinated. He grabbed his jacket, then dropped it. He picked it up again. He looked like a trapped animal realizing the cage door was bolted. The phone on his desk rang. It was a distinctive ringtone, the one reserved for internal executive calls. He stared at the phone. He knew who it was. It was not Ite. It was not Mara. It was the audit committee. He picked it up. "Hello," he said, his voice faint even through the glass. I could not hear the other side of the conversation, but I did not need to. I saw Grant nod. I saw him swallow hard. "Yes," he said. "I understand. I am coming up now." He hung up. He walked out of his office. He did not look at me this time. He did not look at anyone. He walked like a man marching to the gallows. The office was still chaotic. Phones were ringing. People were shouting about the outage, but in that corridor, as Grant Huxley walked toward the elevator to meet his fate, there was a strange, heavy silence. The meltdown was in full swing, but the cleanup had just begun. The boardroom on the 12th floor was designed to intimidate. The table was a slab of polished black granite that seemed to stretch for miles. The chairs were expensive leather, and the view of the Cleveland skyline was spectacular, though nobody in the room was looking out the window. At the head of the table sat Sylvia Vance, the external counsel brought in by the audit committee. She was a woman who did not smile. She wore a suit that cost more than my car, and she had a reputation for dissecting corporate fraud with the precision of a neurosurgeon. Beside her sat the chief audit executive and a representative from the forensic accounting firm they had retained an hour ago. Grant Huxley sat on the left side of the table. He looked composed, but it was a brittle, fragile composure. He was sweating slightly at the temples. I was seated opposite him. "This is all a massive misunderstanding," Grant said, his voice smooth but slightly too loud. "Ms. James is a new hire. She has been here for less than 2 weeks. She does not understand the complexities of our vendor ecosystem. She saw a standard operational waiver and panicked. It is just new hire drama." She overreacted. Sylvia Vance did not look up from the file in front of her. "Drama. Is that what you call a Tier 1 control failure? Mr. Huxley." "It is not a failure," Grant insisted. "It is an efficiency measure. Northbridge is a strategic partner. We have a trusted relationship. Ms. James filed a report based on incomplete information because she was not in the loop." He looked at me with a mix of pity and disdain. "I tried to mentor her. I told her not to worry about the high-level strategy and just focus on her tasks, but she decided to play detective instead of doing her job." Sylvia turned her gaze to me. Her eyes were like ice. "Ms. James, your manager claims you filed this report out of ignorance. What is your response?" I did not speak immediately. I reached into my folder and pulled out a single sheet of paper. It was not a speech. It was the timeline I had constructed. It showed every exception approval Grant had made in the last 6 months. Next to each approval was the digital signature Grant Huxley. And next to that was the date of the vendor's data export. I slid the paper across the granite table. "I did not overreact," I said calmly. "I read the policy. Policy 9.4 states that any unvetted access to customer data is a violation. Mr. Huxley signed these approvals. He bypassed the risk assessment. The dates match the data exfiltration logs. If that is strategic efficiency, then our strategy is data leakage." Sylvia picked up the paper. She scanned it. She looked at the chief audit executive. "The digital signatures are verified," the auditor said quietly. "He signed them." Grant shifted in his chair. "I sign hundreds of things a week. It is administrative. It does not mean—" "Stop," Sylvia said. She raised a hand. "Let us discuss the file found in the archive. The rebate summary." Grant's face went pale. That is just a projection model. It is hypothetical. It is not real money." The forensic accountant spoke up for the first time. "We analyzed the file metadata. Mr. Huxley, it was not a model. It was updated quarterly for the last 18 months. The last update was made 4 days ago. From your laptop. The entries for GH correspond exactly to the dates of the Northbridge contract renewals. Grant opened his mouth, but no sound came out. And, Sylvia continued, flipping a page in her file, we did a little digging into Northbridge enablement. On paper, it is a training consultancy, but the ownership structure is interesting. It is a shell company owned by a holding firm in Delaware. She slid a document toward Grant. It was a corporate registration form. The beneficial owner of that holding firm is a Ms. Elena Corvas. Does that name ring a bell? Grant. The room went silent. Grant stared at the name. She is a consultant, he whispered. She is your former fiancée. Sylvia said, we checked your personnel file. You listed her as your emergency contact 5 years ago. The twist hung in the air like toxic smoke. This was not just a kickback scheme. It was a domestic partnership funded by corporate theft. The money for training and event sponsorship was being funneled directly into the pockets of Grant's ex-fiancée, and by extension, Grant himself, the GH, in the ledger, was taking a cut of the family business. Grant's composure shattered. He slammed his hand on the table. This is ridiculous, he shouted. You are listening to her. She is a thief. She stole confidential files. That ledger was in a restricted folder. She hacked into it. She is the criminal here. He pointed a shaking finger at me. She violated the acceptable use policy. She downloaded sensitive financial data to her personal device. I want her laptop seized. I want security to escort her out of this building right now. She is trying to frame me. It was a desperate, ugly pivot. He was trying to turn the investigation onto me. He wanted to make the method of discovery the crime, rather than the fraud itself. I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice. I did not download anything to a personal device. I said, I moved the file to a secure local folder on my work machine to preserve evidence, as per the whistleblower protection guidelines. I ran a hash check to prove I did not alter it. The file is still there. The audit trail will show I never emailed it, never printed it, and never put it on a USB drive. I simply reported it through the GRC system. I looked Grant in the eye. I followed the process. You are the one who tried to hide it. Grant looked around the room, searching for an ally. There were none. The auditor was looking at the floor. The forensic accountant was taking notes. Sylvia Vance was staring at him with the expression of a predator watching a wounded animal. She is lying, Grant stammered. She is unstable. You cannot trust a new hire who goes digging for dirt on her first week. Sylvia closed the file. The sound was like a gunshot in the quiet room. Grant, she said softly, I have one question for you. Grant looked at her, hope flickering in his eyes. He thought maybe she was giving him a way out. Why? Sylvia asked. Why did you specifically instruct a new hire, on her very first day, to stay quiet? Grant froze. He realized then that the email I had submitted, the one where he told me not to make a big deal out of it, was not just evidence of negligence. It was evidence of consciousness of guilt. If it was just a mistake, he would have explained it. If it was just an oversight, he would have thanked me for finding it, but he had told me to stay quiet. He had tried to suppress the inquiry before it even started. Grant started, but his voice failed him. You told her to stay quiet because you knew, Sylvia said. You knew that if anyone looked at the Northbridge file, they would find Elena Corvas. You knew they would find the rebate ledger. You were not managing a vendor. You were managing a cover-up. Grant slumped in his chair. The fight went out of him. He looked small, defeated, and incredibly tired. It was just business, he muttered. Everyone does it. No, Mr. Huxley, Sylvia said. Everyone does not do it, and certainly not with the company's money. She turned to the chief audit executive. I think we have enough to proceed to the next phase. I sat back in my chair. My hands were trembling slightly under the table, but my face was calm. I had walked into the lion's den armed only with a timeline and a policy number, and I had come out untouched. Grant Huxley had spent years building a fortress of lies, and he had just watched it crumble because he made the mistake of underestimating the person he hired to guard it. Grant Huxley was not a man who knew how to lose with dignity. He left the boardroom with the erratic, jerky energy of a machine that had blown a fuse but was still receiving power. He was wounded, bleeding credibility by the gallon, but he was still technically the director of risk, and like a cornered animal, he decided that if he was going down, he was going to take the person who pushed him. He did not go back to his office to pack. He went straight to the IT operations desk. From my seat, I could see him gesticulating wildly at the lead system administrator. I could not hear the words, but I could read the body language. It was aggressive. It was demanding. He was pointing a finger toward my cubicle. Grant was ordering a remote wipe and an immediate credential revocation. He was trying to initiate an internal investigation protocol against me. In corporate speak, this is the nuclear option. It is usually reserved for employees caught stealing trade secrets or downloading pornography. He wanted to brand me. He wanted security to march me out of the building in front of everyone, holding a cardboard box. Humiliated and discredited, it is called the perp walk. It is the corporate equivalent of a public hanging. I saw the IT administrator hesitate. He typed something into his keyboard, frowned, and then shook his head. Grant yelled something, his face turning a blotchy red, and then stormed away to call building security directly. Grant thought he was pulling rank. He did not realize that rank no longer mattered. The moment I had checked the management pressure box on my report, the governance, risk, and compliance system had placed a digital force field around my employment status. It is called a legal hold. When a whistleblower case is active, the system automatically locks the reporter's account permissions. They cannot be downgraded. They cannot be deleted. Any attempt to alter the user profile triggers a critical alert directly to the General Counsel's mobile device. Grant was trying to fire me, but every command he gave the system was just generating more evidence of retaliation. 5 minutes later, 2 uniformed security guards entered the department. The office went dead silent. The hum of conversation cut off instantly. Heads popped up over cubicle walls like meerkats sensing a predator. Everyone knew what security meant. Someone was getting walked out. Grant stood by the elevator bank, arms crossed, a smirk plastering his face. He was waiting for the show. He wanted the audience to see the troublemaker being removed. He wanted to reassert his dominance through my public execution. The guards walked down the aisle. They were big men, wearing the generic gray uniforms of a contracted security firm. They stopped at my desk. "Hallie James," the taller one asked. I stood up slowly. I picked up my purse. I did not pack a box. I did not look scared. "I am Hallie," I said. "We have orders regarding your presence in the building," the guard said. I looked over at Grant. His smirk widened. He gave me a little wave, a gesture of mock farewell. Then, the guard touched his earpiece. He listened for a moment, his expression shifting from boredom to confusion. He looked at the tablet in his hand, which had just refreshed with a new directive. "Correction," the guard said, his voice loud enough for the quiet room to hear. "Ms. James, we have updated instructions from the Office of the General Counsel. You are not to be removed. We are to escort you to a secure conference room as a protected reporter. We are to ensure no one approaches you." The smirk on Grant's face vanished. It did not fade. It simply dropped off his face, replaced by a look of absolute, hollow shock. "What?" Grant shouted from the hallway. "No, I ordered a removal. She is a security risk." The guard turned to look at Grant. "Sir, please lower your voice. The legal hold order supersedes local management. Ms. James is under protective status." The room gasped. It was a collective intake of breath. The narrative had just flipped in real time. I was not the criminal being dragged away. I was the witness being protected from the mob. Grant was not the enforcer. He was the threat. "Shall we, Ms. James?" the guard asked, gesturing toward the executive elevators. "Thank you," I said. I walked down the main aisle. I kept my head high. I did not look at my feet. I looked straight ahead, past the rows of staring colleagues. I walked past Mara King, who was standing in the doorway of the HR office, looking pale and terrified. I walked past the empty desk where Justin used to sit, and finally, I walked past Grant. He was frozen. He looked like a statue of a man realizing he was made of sand. I did not say a word to him. I did not need to. The security detail flanking me said everything. We reached the lobby. The glass doors revolved, and a man in a sharp, expensive suit walked in. He was holding a leather briefcase and looking impatient. I recognized him. It was the account manager from Northbridge Enablement, the man who had been walking into our server room for months without a badge. He walked straight toward the turnstiles, expecting to breeze through. He tapped his phone against the scanner. Beep, 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 red light, access denied. He frowned and tapped it again. Beep, beep, beep. "Hey," he yelled at the reception desk. "Something is wrong with the gate. Let me in. I have a meeting with Grant Huxley." Sylvia Vance, the external counsel, stepped out from the side office near the reception. She had evidently been waiting for this. "There is nothing wrong with the gate," Sylvia said, her voice cutting through the lobby noise. "Your credentials have been revoked pending a fraud investigation." The Northbridge man scoffed. Do you know who I am? We are a platinum partner. I need to see Grant. Grant Huxley does not have the authority to let you in, Sylvia said, crossing her arms. In fact, Mr. Huxley does not have the authority to order a sandwich right now, and unless you can produce a valid, signed data privacy agreement that predates your first login, I suggest you leave before we call the police for trespassing. The man looked at Sylvia, then at the security guard standing next to me. He realized the game was up. He turned around and walked out, pushing the revolving door so hard it spun for a minute after he was gone. I was led into a conference room on the executive floor. It was quiet. There was a pitcher of water and a plate of cookies, the standard corporate apology for trauma. 5 minutes later, the door opened. It was Owen Price from Internal Audit. He looked different. He was standing straighter. The gray blending-in quality was gone. He looked sharp. He looked like the hunter he actually was. Nice walk, Owen said, sitting down opposite me. You played that perfectly. The legal hold trigger was brilliant. I just followed the policy, I said, pouring a glass of water. We found something else, Owen said. He slid a piece of paper across the table. It was a copy of an expense report from 6 months ago. It was a receipt for a dinner at a steakhouse in downtown Cleveland. The bill was for $400. The attendees listed were Grant Huxley and the Northbridge account manager. Look at the date, Owen said. I looked, October 12th. Now look at the timestamp on the exception approval you found, Owen added. I closed my eyes, recalling the timeline I had built. October 12th, 3 p.m. Exactly, Owen said. He signed the security waiver, giving them access to the data at 3 in the afternoon. 4 hours later, he was eating a $100 ribeye paid for by the company, sitting across from the guy he just gave the keys to. He literally expensed his own bribe. He is sloppy, I said. Arrogance makes people sloppy, Owen replied. He thought nobody would ever audit the director of risk. He thought he was the law. Owen leaned back. Council just briefed the audit committee chair. They are convening an emergency session at 2 o'clock this afternoon. They are not waiting for the quarterly cycle. They are meeting today. What about Grant? I asked. Sylvia just left his office, Owen said. She gave him the courtesy notification. They told him to have his affairs in order by the end of the day. They are framing it as a voluntary separation to save face for the shareholders. But everyone knows, if he does not sign the resignation, they hand the file to the district attorney. I looked out the window. The Cleveland sky was a flat, slate gray. It looked like snow. He tried to destroy me this morning, I said softly. He really thought he could just erase me. He forgot the first rule of the jungle, Owen said, standing up to leave. When you hunt, you better make sure your prey does not have administrative access to the trap. Owen paused at the door. You should stay here until the meeting is over. Enjoy the cookies. You earned them. I sat alone in the silent room. I thought about Grant pacing in his office downstairs. He was probably looking at the pictures of his boat, the awards on his shelf, the little empire he had built on a foundation of unread contracts and silenced employees. He was waiting for the executioner, and the worst part for him was knowing that the executioner was not a person. It was just a policy he had written, ignored, and then weaponized against himself. I took a cookie. It was oatmeal raisin. It tasted terrible, but I ate it anyway. It was the taste of survival. The air in the executive boardroom was not just cold, it was sterile. It smelled of lemon polish and impending termination. The room was vast, dominated by a mahogany table that reflected the recessed lighting like a dark pool of water. At the head of the table sat the chief executive officer of Iron Vale, a man whose time was worth $500 a minute. To his right was the chair of the audit committee, a woman named Eleanor Vance, who was known for her ability to smile while dismantling careers. To his left sat Sylvia Vance, the external counsel, her laptop open and her face unreadable. Grant Huxley sat on the far side. He had loosened his tie. His jacket was draped over the back of his chair. He looked like a man who had been running a marathon in a suit. I was seated near the door. I had no laptop. I had no phone. I had a single manila folder placed squarely in front of me. Let us begin, the CEO said. His voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of absolute authority. We are here to review the findings regarding the Northbridge enablement contract and the associated policy violations. Grant leaned forward immediately. He was not going to wait to be accused. He was going to attack. This is a setup, Grant said, pointing a trembling finger at me. I want to go on record. This entire meeting is the result of a malicious campaign by a disgruntled new hire. Ms. James has been with the company for less than 2 weeks. She does not understand our strategic partnerships. She has manipulated the logs to make standard operational efficiency look like fraud. The CEO did not blink. He turned his head slowly toward me. Ms. James, your response? I did not stand up. I did not raise my voice. I opened my folder. I have no opinion on strategy, I said. I only have documents. I slid the first paper across the table. It was the email Grant had sent me on my second day. Item 1, I said. Dated Tuesday, 9:14 a.m. I asked for the risk assessment. Mr. Huxley replied, Do not make a big deal out of this. Let me handle it. This establishes that he was aware the documentation was missing and instructed a subordinate to stop inquiring. Grant scoffed. That is standard management. I was prioritizing her workload. I slid the second paper. It was a printout of Policy 9.4. Item 2, I said. The corporate policy on control failures. It defines directing staff to ignore a gap as a reportable violation. Mr. Huxley wrote this policy 3 years ago. Ignorance of the rule is not a defense when you are the author. Grant opened his mouth. But I was already sliding the third document, the timeline. Item 3, I said. A chronology of approval timestamps versus data export logs. Every time Mr. Huxley signed an exception, Northbridge downloaded a new batch of customer credit profiles within 15 minutes. The correlation is 100%. The room was silent. The papers sat on the table like bricks. I had not told a story. I had not used emotional language. I had simply laid down the facts. In a room full of people who spun narratives for a living, raw data is the only thing that cuts through the noise. Grant looked at the CEO. Sir, I sign hundreds of approvals a week. I cannot verify every single technical specification. I rely on my team. If there was a glitch in the vendor system, that is on IT, not me. Sylvia Vance, the counsel, looked up from her screen. She took off her reading glasses. Grant, she said. Her voice was conversational, almost friendly. I want to be clear on your defense. You are saying you did not know Northbridge had export access. You are saying you signed the exceptions without understanding what privileges they granted. Exactly, Grant said, looking relieved. I am a director. I look at the big picture. I do not read every line of code in the permission settings. Sylvia nodded slowly. So, you admit you signed a security waiver for a third-party vendor without reading the details. Grant hesitated. He saw the trap opening, but it was too late to stop his momentum. I trusted the vendor, he said weakly. It is a binary choice, Grant, Sylvia said, her voice hardening. If you did not know what you were signing, you are grossly incompetent and negligent in your fiduciary duty to protect this company. If you did know what you were signing, you are complicit in data theft. Which is it? Are you stupid, or are you a criminal? Grant's mouth opened and closed. There was no third option. The chair of the audit committee, Eleanor Vance, leaned forward. She had been silent until now. She folded her hands on the table. We did not need Ms. James to tell us something was wrong, Eleanor said. We have been watching the training budget for 6 months. It has ballooned by 400%. We were already investigating the anomalies. We just could not find the mechanism of the leak. She looked at me with a nod of acknowledgement. Ms. James just happened to be the one who found the faucet and turned on the light. Grant turned pale. You were investigating me. We audit everyone, Grant, Eleanor said. But you made it very easy. You got greedy. The expense reports were clumsy, but that is not the worst part. She opened a folder of her own. We received a call an hour ago, Eleanor continued. It seems the Northbridge account manager was very upset about being denied entry to the building. He called his office. One of his junior accountants got nervous. She thought the police were coming. She called our ethics hotline 10 minutes later. Grant froze. We have a witness statement, Eleanor said, tapping the paper. A junior invoicing clerk at Northbridge. She states that you personally instructed her to split the monthly kickback payments into smaller invoices, all under $5,000, to avoid triggering the CFO's approval threshold. She has the emails, Grant, from your personal Gmail account. This was the checkmate. The internal logs were damaging, but an external witness corroborating the financial structuring was fatal. It proved intent. It proved a conspiracy. Grant looked around the room. His eyes were wide and frantic. The suave corporate operator was gone. In his place was a drowning man looking for someone to pull under with him. It was not just me, Grant shouted. Mara in HR knew. She signed off on the vendor onboarding and the CFO's automated system approved the payments. If I go down, they go down. This is a systemic failure. He was flailing. He was trying to burn the house down to hide his own ashes. Sylvia Vance cut him off. We have already reviewed Ms. King's involvement. She was negligent, yes, but she did not receive 10% of the contract value. You did, and as for your attempt to blame the systems, she picked up a piece of paper from her stack. At 8:45 this morning, you attempted to fire Ms. James, Sylvia said. You ordered a T to wipe her credentials. You tried to have security remove her. You told the staff she was a threat. She looked at Grant with pure disgust. Retaliation against a whistleblower is a federal offense. Grant, it is not just a policy violation. It is against the law. By trying to silence her this morning, you stripped yourself of any protection this company might have offered you. We cannot defend you. We will not defend you. Grant slumped back in his chair. The energy left him. He looked at the ceiling, then at the floor, then at his hands. The CEO stood up. He did not look at Grant. He looked at the window. I have a board meeting in 10 minutes, the CEO said. Fix this. He walked out of the room. Eleanor Vance reached into her folder and pulled out a single document. It was stapled at the top. She slid it across the black granite. It stopped directly in front of Grant. This is a voluntary resignation agreement, Eleanor said. It states that you are leaving for personal reasons. It includes a clause where you agree to repay the unauthorized funds within 30 days. In exchange, Iron Veil agrees not to refer this matter to the Department of Justice immediately. Grant looked at the paper. And if I do not sign, then you are terminated for cause, Eleanor said. We forfeit your stock options. We withhold your severance. And Sylvia walks down the hall and hands the witness statement and the rebate ledger to the FBI. You will be indicted before you get to your car. The room was silent. The only sound was the hum of the air conditioning. Grant looked at the pen lying next to the paper. He picked it up. His hand was shaking so badly that the tip of the pen tapped a rhythm against the table. He looked up. He did not look at Eleanor. He did not look at Sylvia. He looked at me. His eyes were red. He looked at me with a mixture of hatred and confusion. He still did not understand how it had happened. He had followed the rules of power. He had intimidated the weak. He had charmed the strong. He had done everything the corrupt corporate handbook said to do. You, he whispered, you were just a new hire. I was, I said, and you told me to stay quiet. Grant looked down at the paper. He signed his name. It was a messy scrawl. Nothing like the arrogant, flourishing signature on the exception approvals. He dropped the pen. Eleanor Vance took the paper. She checked the signature. She closed her folder. Your badge, she said. Grant reached into his pocket. He unclipped his ID badge. He placed it on the table. Security is waiting outside to escort you to your car, Sylvia said. Do not return to your desk. Your personal effects will be mailed to you. Grant stood up. He looked smaller in his suit than he had when he walked in. He walked toward the door. As he passed me, he paused for a fraction of a second, as if he wanted to say something, to throw one last insult. But he didn't. He couldn't. He walked out the door. The heavy wood clicked shut behind him. I sat there in the silence. The storm was over. The chess game was finished. The king had been toppled by a pawn who simply refused to move where she was told. The paper lay on the black granite table, waiting for a signature. In my mind, I had already seen him sign it, seen him leave, seen the end of the movie, but reality is rarely that smooth. Grant Huxley was not going to go quietly into the good night of unemployment. He looked at the voluntary resignation agreement, and then he looked at me, and his face twisted into a sneer that was ugly and desperate. He picked up the pen, held it for a second, and then threw it across the table. It clattered against the expensive wood, spinning to a stop in front of the general counsel. I am not signing that, Grant said. His voice was shaking, not with fear, but with a sudden, volatile rage. You think you can corner me? I have been with Iron Veil for 8 years. I built this department. If you fire me, I will sue this company for wrongful termination. I will drag your reputations through the mud. I will go to the press and tell them that Iron Veil is scapegoating a director because they lost control of their own data. He stood up, leaning over the table, his knuckles white. He pointed a finger directly at my face. And you, he spat. I will make sure everyone in this industry knows your name. I will paint you as a saboteur. I will say you planted the files. You think you won. You are just a temp with a grudge. I will destroy you. The room was deadly silent. The CEO did not move. The audit chair did not blink. Sylvia Vance, the external counsel, let out a soft sigh. It was the sound of a parent dealing with a toddler who had just thrown a bowl of spaghetti on the floor. She did not argue. She did not threaten back. She simply reached out and tapped a key on her laptop. The large monitor on the wall behind her flickered to life. Grant, Sylvia said, her voice bored. Please look at the screen. Grant froze. He turned his head. On the screen was a system log from the governance, risk, and compliance platform. It was time-stamped for this morning at 7:45. We ran a final audit of the case file before this meeting, Sylvia said. At 7:45 this morning, just before you arrived at the office, a user attempted to access the restricted case evidence folder for case 4029. The user attempted to use an administrative override to delete 3 attachments. She pointed to the line on the screen. User ID G, Huxley, action delete, result access denied, alert sent to legal. Sylvia took off her glasses and looked at him. You tried to destroy evidence this morning. Grant, you tried to hack a legal hold file. That is not just policy violation. That is obstruction of justice. It is a felony. Grant stared at the screen. The fight drained out of him instantly. He had been caught not just in the past, but in the present. He had proved exactly who he was, right up until the bitter end. Policy 9.4 speaks for itself, Sylvia added, but Policy 10.1 regarding data integrity speaks even louder. You just gave us the cause we needed to terminate you without a single cent of severance. The chair of the audit committee, Eleanor Vance, leaned forward. Her voice was low and hard. We are done negotiating. Grant, you have 2 choices. Choice A. You pick up that pen, you sign the resignation, and you walk away. We frame it as a personal health matter. You keep your dignity, but you pay back the money. Choice B. We proceed with termination for cause. We file a police report for the attempted data destruction. We hand the rebate ledger to the FBI, and you leave this building in handcuffs. She paused, letting the silence crush him. Decide, right now. Grant looked at the screen, then he looked at the door, then he looked at me. For the first time, he really saw me. He realized that he had not lost because I was a genius hacker or a corporate spy. He had not lost because of a grand conspiracy. He had lost because he had underestimated the power of his own signature. He had treated the rules as suggestions, and he had treated his people as furniture. He walked around the table. He picked up the pen from where he had thrown it. His hand was shaking so badly that the tip of the pen rattled against the paper. He signed. It was a jagged, ugly scrawl. He dropped the pen. It rolled off the table and hit the carpet with a soft thud. Get out, Eleanor said. Grant stood up. He tried to straighten his tie, a reflex of vanity that looked pathetic in the face of his ruin. He looked at the CEO, but the CEO was checking his watch. He looked at Sylvia, but she was already closing her laptop. He walked to the door. He opened it, and the sounds of the office filtered in phones ringing, keyboards clacking, the mundane symphony of the business he used to think he owned. He stepped out, and the door clicked shut. The room felt instantly lighter. The air pressure seemed to drop. Eleanor turned to me. Her expression softened, just a fraction. You did a dangerous thing, Ms. James, she said. But you did the right thing. Most people would have just looked the other way. I could not, I said. We owe you a debt, Eleanor said. What do you want? We can discuss a promotion. We can discuss a transfer to a different unit if you feel uncomfortable in risk. I shook my head. I do not want a promotion. I do not want a title. Then what? She asked. I want you to close the loophole, I said. I want the exception policy rewritten. No single director should have the authority to bypass a vendor risk assessment without a secondary sign-off from legal or audit. I want the system configured so that what Grant did is technically impossible for the next person. Eleanor looked surprised. She exchanged a glance with the CEO. And, I added, I want a formal whistleblower protection protocol that is more than just a poster in the break room. I want people to know that if they speak up, the system will actually protect them. The CEO nodded. Done. We will initiate the policy review tomorrow. You can lead the drafting committee. I stood up. Thank you. I picked up my folder. I did not feel triumphant. I did not feel like cheering. I felt the deep, exhausting relief of a mechanic who has finally fixed a catastrophic engine failure. I walked out of the boardroom and down the hall to the elevator. I took it down to the main floor. The office was exactly as I had left it, but it felt different. The tension was gone. The cloud of Grant's anxiety, the pressure to stay quiet, had evaporated. I sat down at my desk. My computer was still locked. I typed in my password. The screen flickered to life. I opened my email. I composed one final message. I added Mara King from HR and the Audit Committee to the distribution list. Subject case 4029. Closure. As instructed on my first day, I stayed quiet until the policy spoke. I hit send. I looked across the aisle. Grant's office was dark. His chair was empty, pushed back from the desk as if he had just stepped out for coffee, but he was never coming back. On my second monitor, the dashboard for Northbridge enablement was still grayed out. Account suspended. I took a sip of my water. It was cold. I opened a new spreadsheet. There was still work to be done. There were still policies to review, but for the first time since I walked into Ironvale, the office was quiet. It was not the silence of fear. It was the silence of a clean slate. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I hope you enjoyed this journey through the dark corridors of corporate justice. I would love to know where you are tuning in from. Are you listening at your desk, on your commute, or maybe while hiding in the break room? Please leave a comment below and share your thoughts. If you enjoyed seeing the underdog win, please subscribe to Boss Revenge Stories, like this video, and hit that hype button to help this story reach more people who need a little inspiration to stand up for the truth. Stay safe, and remember to read the fine print.